What if I told you that a young African leader is not just building roads, but building a revolution? That while most presidents pose for photo ops, this man is laying down asphalt, reshaping an entire nation, and making corrupt politicians across Africa squirm in their leather chairs. Well, that's exactly what a Niagara-based YouTuber just uncovered in Burkina Faso. And what he revealed about Captain Ibrahim Traoré has left the internet reeling. Who is this man leading the charge? Why is he being hailed as the next Thomas Sankara by millions of African youths? And how is he single-handedly dismantling decades of Western economic dominance in West Africa, all while refusing a single IMF loan? In this video, we uncover the untold side of Captain Traoré, the real reason behind his meteoric rise, and the massive infrastructure project that's putting Burkina Faso on the map. But this isn't just about roads and bridges. This is about pride, power, and the rebirth of an African nation that many had written off. We'll dissect the Faso Mayabo initiative, dive into how Traoré is using Burkina Faso's own gold to build its future, and reveal why Western generals are suddenly pointing fingers at him. Spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with democracy and everything to do with control. So buckle up, because what you're about to see is not on CNN, and it's definitely not what your textbooks taught you. This is the story of how a YouTuber from Niagara blew the lid off a silent revolution in Burkina Faso, and why Ibrahim Traoré might just be the most dangerous man in Africa to the global elite. The question is, will the rest of the continent follow? Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't rise through polished speeches or elite schools. He rose through fire, through frustration, through frontline battles, and through a bold rejection of business as usual. Born in 1988, Traoré was raised in a Burkina Faso that had lost its way. Once a beacon of Pan-Africanism under Thomas Sankara, the country had since spiraled into instability, corruption, and foreign dependency. Like millions of young Burkinabé, he watched as his nation's potential was drained by leaders more interested in pleasing the West than serving their people. He joined the army, not out of ambition but out of duty, a desire to defend his homeland from terrorist insurgencies that had turned northern regions into war zones. But what Traoré discovered wasn't just a military in disarray. He saw a government paralyzed by inaction, soldiers dying for a country that couldn't even provide them with boots, and elites living in gated luxury while rural communities were left to rot. By 2022, the pressure had reached a boiling point. In a move that shocked both allies and adversaries, Captain Traoré led a popular military coup, ousting the transitional government. Some cried foul, others saw it as salvation. Unlike previous coups that ended in dictatorships, Traoré's first act wasn't to seize palaces or gag the press. It was to speak directly to the people. In fatigues, with no teleprompter, he promised a new era, one rooted in sovereignty, dignity, and development, and he delivered quickly. He slashed ministerial salaries by 30%, doubled local infrastructure budgets, and refused loans from the IMF and World Bank. "Why should we borrow money to do what we can build ourselves?" he asked in one of his earliest speeches. That simple question became a mantra for his administration. In just months, Traoré began laying the groundwork for Faso Mayabo, his ambitious project to build thousands of kilometers of roads using local labor and locally owned equipment. He didn't outsource, he didn't delay, he executed. And that execution is what set him apart. In a continent full of leaders who promise and forget, Traoré promised and built. This wasn't just a new leader. This was a new blueprint for African governance, one forged in courage, not corruption, in action, not aid. The Faso Mayabo initiative is more than a construction plan. It's a national awakening. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would build up to 5,000 kilometers of roads annually, the world scoffed. A landlocked, conflict-ridden nation with limited infrastructure and no major economy. Impossible, they said. Delusional, some added. But Traoré wasn't bluffing. In his eyes, roads were not just about connectivity, they were about sovereignty, dignity, and survival. And he refused to subcontract his country's future to foreign firms who had previously drained Burkina Faso's resources and left behind crumbling infrastructure. So he changed the game. Traoré diverted millions of dollars from foreign consultancy Budgets into buying top-tier road construction equipment, bulldozers, compactors, graders, mixers, and asphalt pavers. Not rentals, not loans, full ownership. The equipment wasn't marked made in China or leased by France. It bore the insignia of a nation taking control of its own destiny. Then came the workforce. Instead of outsourcing labor, Traoré turned to Burkina Faso's youth, the most underutilized asset in the country. Thousands were recruited and trained in engineering, surveying, machinery operations, and maintenance. University graduates and school dropouts alike found themselves behind the wheels of excavators, pouring concrete or designing drainage systems. It was more than a job. It was nation-building, and the results? Staggering. Major arteries such as Ouagadougou to Bobo-Dioulasso were refurbished with high-quality, weather-resistant pavement. Roads that were once washed out each rainy season now held firm. Trade routes, previously a nightmare for farmers and merchants, became reliable channels of commerce. In rural areas, where communities had been cut off for decades, the arrival of new roads sparked immediate change. Farmers could finally transport produce without days-long delays. Pregnant women no longer had to walk for hours on dangerous paths to reach clinics. Students began arriving at schools on time. It wasn't just infrastructure, it was liberation, and that liberation extended to commerce. Local businesses boomed. As transport costs plummeted, markets expanded. Construction material suppliers saw unprecedented demand. Towns that had once been labeled too remote to develop began to rise. But Traoré didn't stop at the roads. Bridges long damaged by floods were reinforced or rebuilt. Drainage channels were re-engineered. Critical urban corridors were modernized to handle increased traffic. And all of it was mapped under a single national strategy, not piecemeal photo-op projects. This wasn't about optics. This was about outcome. Faso Mayabo was structured around 4 pillars: connectivity, security, economic growth, and national pride. Connectivity brought remote regions into the national economy. Security enabled faster deployment of military units and emergency services. Economic growth emerged from the boost in trade and job creation. And national pride, that was felt in every handshake between workers, every cheer from villagers as machines rolled in. What makes it revolutionary is its independence. Unlike neighboring nations trapped in decades-long Chinese road loan deals, Burkina Faso owns its infrastructure. There's no Beijing clause, no foreign oversight committee, no debt trap looming overhead. Just Burkinabe citizens building Burkinabe roads for Burkinabe futures. International observers were stunned. Wad Maya, the famous Ghanaian YouTuber who visited the country, expected some cosmetic upgrades. What he found was a country in motion, a ground-level transformation happening at a pace Africa hadn't seen in years. Standing beside a freshly paved highway, he said, "This is not a documentary. This is history in the making." And he was right. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as a footnote in global development, is becoming a case study in what happens when a country believes in itself and puts that belief into action with concrete, steel, and grit. Traoré's infrastructure revolution is exposing not only the failure of past governments, but also the possibilities that arise when leadership stops waiting for foreign validation. In Faso Mayabo, roads don't just lead to cities, they lead to a future Africa never thought it could build on its own. If roads are the veins of a nation, then its wealth, its gold, its minerals, its land, is the lifeblood. And Captain Ibrahim Traoré is making sure that blood no longer flows outward. Since taking power, Traoré has launched a sweeping campaign to reclaim Burkina Faso's national resources from foreign control. The country, rich in gold and other minerals, has long seen its profits vanish overseas while its people struggled with poverty and debt. But Traoré saw through the system, and he decided to break it. His first major move, nationalizing gold mines. Under his administration, foreign companies, mostly French, Canadian, and Australian, were forced to renegotiate contracts. Several mines were taken over by the state, with revenues redirected to national development. That money didn't end up in Swiss bank accounts. It went straight into schools, roads, water systems, and public salaries. Traoré also greenlit the construction of a state-owned gold refinery, slashing the country's dependence on foreign processors and boosting domestic job creation. It was a declaration of economic sovereignty and a massive middle finger to the old economic order. But the reforms didn't stop there. Traoré scrapped colonial legacies with bold symbolic changes. He removed French as an official language in government documents. He banned colonial-era judicial wigs in courts. He even renamed streets and public buildings that honored French governors and generals. Some called it cosmetic. But for the people of Burkina Faso, especially the youth, it was cathartic. It meant they no longer had to walk down avenues named after colonizers. They were reclaiming their identity, one nameplate at a time. And then came the financial revolution. Traoré launched the Burkina State Bank, a government-owned institution created to finance national projects without foreign strings attached. Its goal: end the stranglehold of foreign loans. Instead of borrowing from Paris or Washington, Burkina Faso would fund itself, using its own money, its own resources, and its own people. These moves weren't just nationalistic gestures, they were part of a grander strategy to unshackle Burkina Faso from decades of economic dependency, a reset, a fresh start. And yes, they ruffled feathers. Western diplomats grumbled, economists warned of isolation, but inside Burkina Faso, the people applauded. They saw a leader finally using the country's wealth for its own good, not to please foreign donors or investors. With each bold policy, Traoré is redefining what it means to lead in Africa, not as a client state, but as a sovereign powerhouse. Traoré's unapologetic nationalism hasn't gone unnoticed, and the reactions from abroad have been swift, sharp, and revealing. In the halls of Western power, his name triggers discomfort. From Brussels to Washington, he's been labeled unpredictable, radical, even dangerous. But ask the people of Burkina Faso, and you'll hear a different story. They call him necessary. What makes foreign powers so nervous? For decades, African nations were expected to follow a script. Take loans from Western institutions, sign trade deals that favor multinationals, and keep foreign diplomats happy. Traoré tore up that script on day one. He didn't just refuse new IMF loans, he publicly criticized the debt trap model, accusing global lenders of keeping Africa in economic chains. And then came his boldest move yet, nationalizing Burkina Faso's gold sector. That hit a nerve. Western companies, many with deep mining interests in the country, were suddenly sidelined. Profits they once considered guaranteed were redirected to national development. In response, international media outlets began publishing critical op-eds, painting Traoré as an authoritarian strongman. Then came General Laura Langley's comments, a U.S. military official who accused Traoré of using Burkina Faso's gold for personal protection instead of national development. The backlash online was fierce. African Twitter, led by youth influencers and economists, slammed the remarks as colonial arrogance. "They want us poor, obedient, and indebted," one user wrote, but Traoré is flipping the script. France, once Burkina Faso's colonial ruler, took it a step further. Diplomatic ties were frozen, military cooperation suspended, and French troops ordered to withdraw. Instead of chaos, something unexpected happened. There was celebration in the streets. To many Burkinabe, it felt like a second independence. Traoré also strengthened alliances with neighbors pushing similar reforms. Mali and Niger expressed solidarity, with some leaders openly praising Traoré's stance against external pressure. A growing Pan-African bloc, focused on sovereignty and resource control, seems to be forming in real time. But not all the reactions are hostile. China, watching from a distance, has remained cautious but curious. Russia has expressed interest in cooperation, particularly in mining and energy. And grassroots activists across Africa are rallying behind Traoré, calling him a symbol of African dignity and resistance. On social media, hashtags like #IBF for Africa and #Watch Own Our Resources are trending. YouTube videos showcasing Burkina Faso's transformation are amassing millions of views. Young people across the continent are asking, why can't our leaders do this? The fear in foreign capitals isn't just about Traoré's policies, it's about his example. He's proving that an African nation can take control of its resources, defy international pressure, and still function, maybe even thrive. This terrifies the global elite. For too long, African governments have been warned that rejecting aid or loans would result in economic collapse. Traoré is breaking that myth, and in doing so he's showing others the way. The international backlash isn't really about gold or governance, it's about a shifting power dynamic. A small country with a bold leader is punching far above its weight and reminding Africa of its own power. To some, he's a threat. To others, he's the beginning of a revolution. Walk the streets of Ouagadougou today, and you'll feel it. Not just the rumble of bulldozers or the hum of machinery, but a kind of energy, a quiet pride, a belief that for once the future belongs to the people. At the heart of that belief are the youth. They are not just the backbone of Captain Traoré's infrastructure revolution, they are its soul. Under his leadership, thousands of young Burkinabés have been recruited into national development programs. From road builders to machine operators, from technicians to agricultural planners, young people are finally being handed the tools and the trust to shape their nation. And they've risen to the challenge. Instead of fleeing the country, in search of opportunity, they're staying, working, innovating. For the first time in decades, many young Burkinabés feel ownership, not just of jobs, but of the future. They're not building for a contractor. They're building for their communities, their families, and themselves. Traoré's decision to equip and train local labor wasn't just smart economics. It was a declaration of faith in Burkina Faso's youth. A statement that said, "You are not a liability, you are the solution." And the impact has been explosive. Social media platforms are flooded with posts of young engineers showcasing their latest projects. Rural youth share before and after. Videos of new roads leading into their towns. The hashtag #BuildBurkina is trending for all the right reasons. But beyond the hashtags is a deeper transformation, a sense of purpose that has replaced despair. For years, the narrative around African youth was one of hopelessness, unemployment, migration, frustration. But under Traoré, that story is changing. And not just in Burkina Faso. Across Africa, young people are watching and wondering, could this happen here? In Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa, youth groups are referencing Traoré in their protests and petitions. In Senegal, university students held a forum titled, "The Traoré Model, Can It Work for Us?" On platforms like X and YouTube, content creators are analyzing Burkina Faso's policies and urging their own leaders to follow suit. Traoré isn't just inspiring change at home, he's setting a regional standard. But perhaps the most powerful response has been emotional. Pride, dignity, hope. A construction worker in Kaya told a local journalist, "For the first time, I feel like my country believes in me." A student in Bobo Dioulasso said, "We're not just learning history, we're making it." This emotional shift is what scares corrupt leaders the most, because once young people feel empowered, they stop begging and start building. They stop waiting for change and start demanding it. And in that momentum lies a quiet revolution. Burkina Faso was once written off, just another poor, landlocked country trapped in a cycle of instability. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré has flipped that narrative on its head. With bulldozers, bold reforms, and belief in his people, he sparked a movement that's redefining what leadership looks like on the African continent. In just 2 years, he's done what many said couldn't be done. He's reclaimed national wealth, built thousands of kilometers of roads, trained a new generation of engineers and laborers. And most importantly, he's restored a sense of ownership to the people of Burkina Faso. This isn't just about infrastructure, it's about identity. It's about breaking free from the economic chains of the past and choosing a future rooted in sovereignty, self-reliance, and dignity. Traoré's model is shaking the foundations of African politics. Corrupt leaders are nervous. Western powers are uncomfortable. But the people? They're inspired. Across the continent, the question is growing louder. If Burkina Faso can do it, why can't we? And maybe that's the true power of this story. Not just the roads, not just the reforms, but the example. The reminder that Africa doesn't need to beg. It needs to build. And to the Niagara YouTuber who helped the world see it, thank you for reminding us that truth doesn't always come from newsrooms. It can come from a camera, a mic, and the courage to show what others won't. So wherever you are, whether you're in Toronto, Lagos, Accra, or Nairobi, one thing is clear: the world is watching. And a new chapter in African leadership is being written by a captain with a plan and a people finally in motion. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that mainstream media won't tell you. And if this story inspired, you share it, because the world needs to know what's happening in Burkina Faso.